Imagery, appealing to the senses. Imagery is visually descriptive or figurative language, especially in a literary work. It uses an author's words, such as vivid or descriptive language, to really add depth to the work. Imagery appeals to the human senses and deepens that connection or understanding to the work. What do I mean by that? Well, when an author uses images and wording that really appeal to sight, hearing, taste, touch, or smell, it brings the work to life for the reader. So when you are working on identifying imagery in works, you are really looking for those places where an author uses that vivid and descriptive language to bring an image to life for the reader. Sometimes we call it sensory language because creating imagery in a work involves the use of words that appeal to or refer specifically to those senses, and adds interest to the writing by making it more realistic and appealing. It's really part of a writer's style. If some writers are heavily into imagery and they use it often, and some writers really use it sparingly just to draw attention to specific situations. It depends on the style and the purpose that the author has for writing. It's a key component to how interested the reader will likely be while they read, though. An author that uses no imagery at all probably wouldn't even get published. But authors that are descriptive at those points where description is necessary, it really pulls the reader in. It shows them rather than tells them what is occurring in the writing. I'm sure you've heard of show, not tell. Imagery is a way that that happens. So instead of simply saying that, the ice cream was sweet, you might say something like, the ice cream felt cold on his tongue. The sweetness trickling down the back of his throat reminded him of a summer day. Something like that, that really appeals to the senses. Good writing uses imagery to enhance the connection to the reader. So the author can more effectively bring the picture of what they are trying to portray to the reader by really using vivid, descriptive language that appeals to what someone might see, hear, taste, touch, or smell were they in that situation as well. An image can be so fresh and powerful that it can speak to our deepest feelings. Really, imagery is meant to make people feel joy or grief or wonder or horror or even love. Think back to the last great book you read, those situations that just pulled you in. Chances are the author was using vivid, descriptive language to bring feelings out in you as a reader. As humans, we crave connection, and we can get this in literature if the author is really effective at pulling us in, and imagery is a way that that happens. So, imagery can evoke mood, like it can set the mood, make the audience really feel something. It can create tension, make you feel like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Suspense. And it can create atmosphere. What kind of mood or what sort of background are they trying to create for you, the reader? And imagery uses precise, vivid language. So, in other words, crimson waves of ringlets instead of just like red hair. You want to make sure, if you are using imagery or trying to identify imagery, that you're really looking for those places where they've chosen words that are, maybe not quite commonplace or maybe refer specifically to a sense. So, like, here's an example. Let's say someone is cooking. You could say, they pulled the pizza from the oven. Or, the irresistible aroma wrapped its arms around the woman when she opened the oven. So we're talking about this aroma. You really are like, oh, wow. It uses figurative language, personification. It wrapped its arms around the woman. So if you see some kind of personification, that might be a good example of imagery. You have to ask yourself, are they trying to bring an image to life for me here? The rainbow of colors flashing from the dress made it impossible to ignore. That's a little bit more effective than she wore a rainbow dress, don't you think? So again, if they're trying to describe how it caught your eye, maybe that's some imagery referring to sight. Imagery can give you some kind of an impression of sound as well. The man's back cracked when the chiropractor touched him. I guess that's okay, but really, the chiropractor pushed forcefully down on my spine, and I could hear a car crash of bones scraping bone inside of my back. So again, we have this sense of sound, and we know it's sound because we actually see the word hear, right? So we know it's imagery that's trying to talk to us about our sense of hearing. And it just uses much more vivid and descriptive language, right? Instead of just saying, I could hear my back crack, we hear a car crash of bone. So it uses a metaphor, another type of figurative language that you'll often see when we're talking about imagery. So you can sometimes see personification, you can sometimes see metaphor when we're talking about imagery, because figurative language is really all about using those precise, vivid words as well. Imagery can also appeal to the sense of touch in the reader. So you could be reading something that describes how something feels, that's really trying to bring it to life. So if I said, he slammed his hand in the car door, wow, that probably hurt, right? What if I described it like this? When Henry's hand was caught in the car door, 1,000 needles rampaged their way through every nerve in his body. A lot more vivid language, right? So again, we're going with a metaphor here. We're comparing the pain that he felt to 1,000 needles working their way through the body. Very much more powerful image in terms of imagery, in terms of what it really felt like, what that the touch of that, slamming of the car door felt like on his skin. So I'm showing you the pain rather than just telling you that it hurt. This is what imagery does. Here's another example. You could say, the steak was good. Or you could say, when I took a bite, the rich juices, savory spices, and succulent taste overwhelmed me. Again, giving you a more clear picture of exactly what that image is supposed to be. So your job is to find examples in the literature that you read. Well, how do you find them? It really depends on the writer. Obviously, some are more descriptive than others. If you're reading something in first person, maybe you have a character that doesn't think super descriptively, so you have to be kind of careful, but it is present in good literature. Pages heavy in dialogue may have less description. You can look for color words, words that actually mention the senses like look, smell, hear, those kinds of things, or figurative language. Remember we talked about personification, similes, metaphors. Those could be a good indication that imagery is present as well. But you have to ask yourself, is the author really trying to paint a picture with their words or try to make me really hear, feel, see, taste, touch, or smell something? If that's the case, then you're looking at an example of imagery. Here's an example from the Berlin Boxing Club that has to do with sight. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The right top half of my lip had swollen to triple its normal size, and a dark red scar lined the soft pink skin along the top of my teeth. Dried blood formed a patchy goatee around my mouth, and a purple bruise framed the entire right side of my face, punctuated by large red mounds of raised flesh near my eye and chin where I had been hit. So the author is attempting to paint a picture, really get you to see something here. This is imagery. He does this by giving you specific colors, right? Soft pink skin, large red mounds, and by really describing things, swollen to triple its normal size. A patchy goatee. It's not literally forming a goatee, that's figurative language. It's comparing the dried blood metaphorically to what a goatee would look like around the mouth. And then the raised flesh near the eye and chin. You can really picture what this person's face looks like. So it's an effective description here in Berlin Boxing Club that helps bring an image to life in front of you. You're almost seeing it based on the words. Here's another example for smell. I lay still and took another minute to smell. I smelled the warm, sweet, all-pervasive smell of silage or grass, as well as the sour, dirty laundry spilling over the basket in the hall. I could pick out the acrid smell of Claire's drenched diaper, her sweaty feet, and her hair crusted with sand. The heat compounded the smells, doubled the fragrance. Howard always smelled and through the house his scent always seemed to be warm. So in this book, A Map of the World, again, you have this idea of someone's just laying there and they're kind of just smelling what the house smells like around them. You can assume that it's hot outside because there's sweat and sour, dirty laundry, and it's probably summer because there's the smell of grass. But if you're reading this, again, the author uses this really vivid, descriptive language to get you to really smell something. And you can almost smell it, can't you? It doesn't seem like it would smell very good. Here's an example of sound from The Maze Runner, which some of you may be familiar with. Ben screamed then, without pause, a sound so piercing that Thomas covered his ears. It was a bestial, lunatic cry, surely ripping the boy's vocal cords to shreds. At the last second, the front keeper somehow loosened the larger pole from the piece attached to Ben and yanked it back into the glade, leaving the boy to his banishment. Ben's final screams were cut off when the walls closed with a terrible boom. Now, if you've read this story, this is the part where they banish Ben to the glade after he attacked someone. And I think the author was trying to really get you to hear the sort of animalistic, desperate quality to Ben's scream, right? So they take it and compare it to a beast. It's bestial. He sounds like a lunatic. And they really try to use that vivid language, such as, let me see if I can find it. a sound so piercing that Thomas had to cover his ears. So if you're looking for imagery, notice how they specifically mention a sound, they specifically mention ears. So it's a good hint that, hey, you know what, the author's probably trying to ascribe a sound to me and bring it to life. The significance of this particular piece, why they would have used the imagery right here, again, is to show you how desperate and upset Ben was being banished in the glade because he knew he was going to die. So that's a good example from Dashner's The Maze Runner. Our last example comes to us from the Hunger Games. It says, the moment I slide into my chair, I'm served an enormous platter of food. There's an elegant glass of orange juice. At least I think it's orange juice. I've only tasted an orange once at New Year's when my father bought one as a special treat. A cup of coffee. My mother adores coffee, which we could almost never afford, but it only tastes thin and bitter to me. A rich brown cup of something I've never seen. They call it hot chocolate, says PETA. It's good. I take a sip of the hot, sweet, creamy liquid, and a shudder runs through me. Even though the rest of the meal beckons, I ignore it until I've drained my cup. Now, in this scene, it's Katniss narrating. She's never tasted hot chocolate before, and where she comes from, food is pretty scarce if you're familiar with the book. So the author really does a good job in this particular novel describing the experiences Katniss has with foods that she's never tried before and how it really becomes just a sensory experience for her. So we're talking about taste. Obviously, they're eating, so we know that that's the type of imagery we're looking for. And then they just use really vivid language: hot, sweet, creamy, liquid. They talk about her reaction to the taste, how a shudder just runs through her. So I feel like when you're looking for imagery, you're looking for those places where a significant moment is occurring. And this is one where she really begins to realize that how much is really out there. Aside from what is in her district. And the way that the author paints this picture through the beautiful taste of the hot chocolate is really effective. There are other instances in the Hunger Games, like where she's fighting and she tastes blood in her mouth at one point, that aren't always pleasant. Smells that aren't pleasant, tastes that aren't pleasant. But again, the author's trying to bring them to life for you. So to become a better writer, you would pay attention to how authors use imagery in the books you read, which is what we're trying to get you to do when you perform these journal tasks. Pay attention. When you notice an author really using imagery, really describing something or trying to invoke those five senses somehow, using figurative language, using vivid description, pay attention to that because it can make you a better writer. When they use sensory language you should use sensory language to evoke images in your work. Remember, show, don't tell. Suzanne Collins could have easily said, the hot chocolate was delicious. But instead, she shows her craft of how professional she really is and what a good writer she is by describing it in a completely different situation. If you want to take your writing up a notch away from just being a seventh grade writer, you want to think about that. You want to think about showing, not telling. So as a reader, you become better writers by being a better reader. By looking at imagery and how it's used, you can kind of do that. Thank you for listening. This has been a little tale about imagery.